Established in 1994 by the government of the Bahamas, Parliamentary Channel 40 broadcasts gavel-to-gavel coverage of the proceedings of both houses of Parliament, providing up-to-date information, including live interviews and historical data on the workings of one of the most important branches of government. Good morning, I'm Anthony Newbold. Welcome to the Parliamentary Channel's live coverage of the House of Assembly. Today, debate continues on the 2013-2014 budget. We're also streaming live at livestream.com/ZNS Bahamas. You can visit us on the internet, on the ZNS website, znsbahamas.com, and of course, you can check us on Facebook. Hope Strachan, the member for Seabreeze and the Minister of State in the Ministry of Transport and Aviation, begins the presentations this morning. We're going to go back those we normally do and give you some of what happened the last time we were here in the House of Assembly. Theo Neely, the member for North Eleuthera, was one of several presenters. We're going to let you hear what Mr. Neely had to say, and then we're going to listen to some of Kalis Rowe. He's the Minister of State in the Prime Minister's office, responsible for investments, and he talked about several things, including the establishment of an economic unit in the Prime Minister's office.
When the current administration borrowed $504 million during the last budget, they blamed the former administration. When they borrowed $100 million during the midterm budget just a few weeks ago, or midterm report, just a few months ago, they blamed the former administration. Now we're starting to get the point there. Today, and with this resolution, with the borrowing of some $465 million, guess what? They're blaming the former administration. Yet they said they were ready on day one. Ready on day one. Blaming the former administration. Mr. Speaker, my question is, when will they stop blaming and start doing? My thoughts is 3 years from now, will they still be blaming the former administration? Or everything they get the blame. Everything. Mr. Ingram, you always hear Mr. Ingram's name, the former Right Honorable Prime Minister, former member of North Abaco. Everything. If the sun shines, Mr. Ingram. If it don't shine, Mr. Ingram. If it's this, Mr. Ingram. Mr. Ingram not. Mr. Ingram not. This, my friends, we have a new government. You've been in office now for 13 months. Not day. This ain't day one. This 13 months. And you're still blaming a man who's no longer in this house. Get to the job, do what you have to do, and continue working for the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, should we not expect to see something for the money that has been borrowed? The Bahamian people deserve and want to see how the money was spent by the government. And what all the promises and the campaigns and all the stuff that they said they were ready on day one to do. Almost $1.1 billion later, and still, Mr. Speaker, no real reduction in crime. No 10,000 new jobs. Almost $1.1 billion later, no successful mortgage relief program. No national health insurance that was promised in the first year. No purchase of BTC. But what we do see in this current budget, Mr. Speaker, is new taxes, more taxes, and even more taxes. Mr. Speaker, I remind the Bahamian people, when the F&M borrowed money, the people were able to see and feel what they got. Mr. Speaker, we got in North Eleuthera, for example, new roads. The road to Preacher's Cave. For the first time, persons and tourists were able to visit that historical. They were able to go to that historical site without thinking they would break up their STs and their cars and drive into that cave smoothly. Mr. Speaker, we got the 3-Island Dock. We got the Jeans Bay Dock in North Eleuthera as well. And that's finished. It looks very nice, I must say. Right out to the end of the dock, there's a nice pavilion where passengers can wait on their ferry boats to go to Spanish Wells. Also in North Eleuthera, we got a water plant in Curran Island. Got new docks in Curran Island. A dock in Hatchet Bay. And in fact, when the leader came to visit, when the great leader of the opposition came to visit with a team in North Eleuthera a few months ago, we went to that pavilion and that dock in Hatchet Bay, right on that safe harbor, in the famous harbor, Hatchet Bay, We went right out there and took a few minutes break, and when the leader of the opposition, the member for Kalani, and the team of members of the opposition, and Eleuthero was happy to have them. But the point that I'm making, Mr. Speaker, is we went out to that great dock in Hatchet Bay in that safe harbor that was built by the Free National Movement. Mr. Speaker, we can't forget the 52-week program. I know we always throw that around. People always try to find reasons why it shouldn't have been and should not have been. The reality is whatever program it was that employed people, in North Eleuthero it employed single moms, persons who couldn't pay bills, and certainly persons now, when I go home in North Eleuthero, they now complain to me because they don't have employment. They're underemployed and unemployed and can't pay their bills. They were the only persons in their home that were making funds, that were bringing funds to pay for the family and to keep the bills going, to keep their homes, Mr. Speaker. So we can't forget the 52-week program. Surely it might not have helped us personally in this House, but it helped the Bahamian people that needed it. Mr. Speaker, we can't forget the Jump Start program. I know in North Eleuthero, I can't forget the new school in Spanish Wells that was built under the former administration. In fact, that school is yet to be officially opened. It's been operating now for over a year, but still not officially open. But I thank the former administration for doing that. Mr. Speaker, the list goes on. I could be here for days, but I've got a limited time. But we can't forget the $191 million that was spent for the U.S. terminal. Let us not forget the $48 million was spent in the harbor dredging. $13 million in the straw market. Mr. Speaker, when the former administration spent money, you were able to see where the money was spent. Mr. Speaker, this administration has borrowed lots and lots of money. Lots and lots of money, like the song says. But we can't see and we can't feel, and it can't feed the people. Mr. Speaker, we continue, as I said earlier, to hear the blame game and the use of the former administration as a scapegoat. How long will this continue? The Bahamian people want actions and results, not blame. The honeymoon is long over. Even in the best of honeymoons, it'd be over by now. Stop the blame, fix the problems, come up with solutions. It's now 13 months, not day one, 13 months. Mr. Speaker, the blame game serves as nothing more than an attempt to distract and divert the people of the Bahamas from the mess and the mismanagement of the current administration. And to think, Mr. Speaker, there might almost be another 4 years of this unorganized, unplanned management. I say, Lord, how long, Lord, how long? How long must the Bahamas endure unplanned, unorganized management of a government? Mr. Speaker, we've seen an administration that says a lot and does little in the process. An administration of hopes and dreams. Yes, hope is just across from me. But the Bahamian people want hopes and dreams. They've been promised hopes and dreams of a better life, of a good economy, of a government that will solve crime, of a government that will now solve all the issues. Mr. Speaker, they were sold dreams, dreams of which the Bahamian people bought into. However, they are now awake and aware. Like the song says, dreams, 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 dreams. The Bahamian people want to see the help and hope that was promised. They don't want to hear the blame. They want to know what happened to the mortgage relief program that was promised. We want to know what happened to the 10,000 jobs that was promised if elected in office. In fact, that was promised when they came in my territory, the area that I am proud to represent, my constituency. That speech was made, that grand speech of 10,000 jobs to be immediately within the first year, provided the Bahamian people. That was made in Hatchet Bay. The Bahamian people still await those 10,000 jobs. Year one has passed. Year one has passed. We're now in month number 13. 1 year, 1 month. They also want to know, according to the Charter of Governance, page 15, a direct quote, it says, we will create and strengthen the economy. Not sure what calendar we're using, but as I said, Mr. Speaker, we're now in month number 13. The year is over. The opportunity for those 10,000 jobs as promised has now passed. Page 41 of the same Charter of Governance informed the Bahamian people that the current administration will employ more than 22,000 new jobs in this year in its term in office. Dreams, 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 Mr. Speaker. We want to know what happened to the National Health Insurance program that was promised if elected the first year in office. Mr. Speaker, instead what we got was a referendum. A referendum that cost the Bahamian people money, that cost all of us funds. A referendum that took from our time when we should have been looking at areas of how to address unemployment, to increase employment, to make sure and to reduce crime. We spent all our energies looking at the referendum rather than coming up with solutions. Mr. Speaker, there were many persons unemployed in our country, and that's the time period. The time we've wasted on all these things should have been the time period we were looking and focusing on finding new jobs and jobs. Those 10,000 jobs in the first year we should have found. Mr. Speaker, one of the great challenges that we're faced with in this country is unemployment. It's no secret. The last stats I have is the semi-annual labor force survey that was conducted by the Department of Statistics, and I quoted this before, but that's the last statistics we have, and that was November 2012. And it identified unemployment rates in the Bahamas as follows. At that time in Grand Bahama it was some 18%, Nassau 13.1%, in the Bahamas overall 14%. The youth, Mr. Speaker, at that time was some 30.7%. I'm not sure whether these stats are today. In fact, I understand the youth unemployment rate might be higher. And that's the greatest concern that I do have, Mr. Speaker. So the youth around 30% is what I'm told. Yet on the other hand, Mr. Speaker, what we've gotten since the new administration has been elected in office is the largest cabinet in the history of the Bahamas. All with new cars. We've seen the significant number of seniors rehired into senior and well-paying jobs, Mr. Speaker. And the member that spoke before I did, the member for Pinewood, when he spoke, he said he blamed the former administration, and he quoted that during the budget of 2009-2010, the former administration made certain cuts to the budget. What the member failed to say and to remind the Bahamian people was, yes, Mr. Speaker, the administration did make the cuts. One of the cuts that the administration did do in that budget was to cut the salary of the Prime Minister of the country. They cut the salary of the cabinet ministers, and they cut the salary of the members of Parliament. They started with themselves. So they realized the need to cut, and they cut their own salaries. Mr. Speaker, we hear lots of talk about a new generation of leaders. Yet all we see is the same old faces resurfacing over and over again. Yet we say we believe in Bahamian people. Some unemployed young persons, as I noted, about 30%. Yet we say we believe in young people. Mr. Speaker, I can speak firsthand for the persons of North Eleuthera, where many people are working a few days a week. They're underemployed at this time at the hotels. They're making very little money, and it's difficult for them to pay their bills, to keep the lights on, and to feed their families. Now, I don't want to say that this is something unusual. This is a cycle that usually occurs every year. This is a cycle that usually occurs every year, but at the current time, during the summer months, these employees now find themselves underemployed with difficulty paying their light bills, feeding their families. Mr. Speaker, our people are hurting. That's the bottom line. Mr. Speaker, when we take a closer look at the budget, one will observe that the overall revenue to be gained from passports are projected to decrease by $258,270. Is this a suggestion that less Bahamians will be getting or able to afford passports? Mr. Speaker, on the other hand, we're told that construction is on the rise. When we look at fees projected for building permits, it is noted that there's a decrease in revenue collected from, or projected to be a decrease in revenue collected from $1,524,740 in 2012-2013 to $1,492,250.
When members of the House of Assembly last met, now we're going to let you listen to some of Kayla's role, the Minister of State in the Prime Minister's office, responsible for investments, as we prepare to welcome those from Radio 1540, the National Voice, Radio 810 in Grand Bahama, and, of course, 104.5 FM And we also encourage you to go and visit us online, livestream.com/ZNS Bahamas. Until 10 o'clock tonight is when we're going to go with this budget debate 2013-2014. This is Minister Kalis Rowe when the House last met.
Goals and aspirations of the people whom elect you to represent them in this honorable House. Secondly, provide national representation within the portfolio the Prime Minister has given you the privilege to serve. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, it's difficult to balance the competing priorities. Mr. Speaker, as I reflect on the activities of the last year, I'm very proud to have accomplished quite a number of successful initiatives which have formed the basis for the coming together of a community which has seen its fair share of issues over the years. Mr. Speaker, I would like to list several of the initiatives organized, sponsored, or participated in by my team in Pinewood. We organized a legal aid clinic where we invited members of the community that had issues of a legal nature that did not have access to an attorney to get advice on how to go about getting their issues resolved. And I was very pleased that the team from the Eugene DePuch Law School came and supported that initiative on our behalf, 4 strong. And we got lots of interesting issues that we had to deal with, and I am certain that the members of that community really appreciated the effort that we made on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, we also organized a health fair, which was spearheaded by the Urban Renewal team, along with the team from the Pinewood Constituency Office, and that went over extremely well, Mr. Speaker. We also organized a movie night on the park. And what was interesting during this movie night on the park, Mr. Speaker, was they were playing a movie called Avatar. And there were about 80 kids out there. And when I got there, I thought that Avatar was a bit too violent. So I asked them to change the movie. And they changed the movie to Life of Pi, which I thought would have represented something that the young kids would appreciate. I thought it was a very animated movie, had good storyline. And 10 minutes into the movie, Mr. Speaker, 80% of the kids had gotten up and were playing basketball and doing other things. So I told them to put Avatar back on. Mr. Speaker, we also organized several urban renewal marching band marchabouts in the community of Pinewood. And what we wanted to do by that, Mr. Speaker, was to let the kids in the community see how exciting Urban Renewal Band was, to see all of the opportunities to participate in a fun activity and an educational activity. And we went through several areas in the community, and that went over extremely well, because after the first iteration of it, we had many young people sign up to join the band in Pinewood. We held many community meetings on the economy, on crime, on value-added tax. And when we had the meeting on value-added tax, I was very pleased to see how many people came out and how many people were concerned about how this would impact their lives moving forward. And we were able to provide them with good information that we think they understood and will help us to, as we begin to implement this, help us to ensure that people have a good appreciation for how it's going to impact them long term. We also organized a job fair, Mr. Speaker, along with Garden Hills, which went over extremely well. I went to the grand opening of the Solomon's Fresh Market in Harbor Bay. I did the keynote address there, and I was very pleased to see 2 individuals from Pinewood that were hired as a result of that job fair. So if anyone questions the value of doing activities such as this, that's an indication of the high level and high value. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. We also organized a Christmas basketball camp, Mr. Speaker, and I was very pleased at how this camp turned out. Jeff Rogers managed it for me, and we were able to have quite a number of kids over a 2-week period, staying out of trouble, participating in a fun activity, participating in a developmental activity. And at the closeout of the camp, Mr. Speaker, we invited Rick Fox to come and spend some time with us. And I know I told this story before, where I went up to dunk on him, and he pulled me out of the air. And, Mr. Speaker, that's my story, and I'm going to continue to stick with it. There are a number of other activities. I won't list all of them, Mr. Speaker, but I believe that we had a very successful year in Pinewood. There is still much to do. Mr. Speaker, these activities are those of a team and a representative who cares about the future of that community. Mr. Speaker, these are the activities of a team and representative who understands the importance of being actively involved in building a community. And it's very important to ensure that our intention and activities are designed to enhance the lives of people we serve as members of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, it does not help the cause when people who we know love this country and care about our people demonstrate something differently by politicizing events that are of national importance and national impact for singular gain. And I say that, Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the island of New Providence experienced an abnormal amount of rainfall, which only occurs once in every blue moon, if I can use that term. And history will probably record the rains of 2013 as one of the worst in this era. Mr. Speaker, the island of New Providence experienced more than 18 inches of rain in 24 hours, I understand. And this was coupled with a spring tide, resulting in extreme flooding. And there's no secret, New Providence is flat. The water table is extremely shallow. Many communities were severely impacted by this flood. Communities which historically would not be impacted. And, Mr. Speaker, I watched the news one evening and was very amazed to see a resident of the Eastern District discussing his total loss. He, however, was in good spirits because his insurance would take care of him. Mr. Speaker, it's no secret that the constituency I represent is prone to flooding during ordinary rainfalls. So you can imagine the impact this would have on the residents of Pinewood during extreme rainfalls. And what was so amazing to me, Mr. Speaker, was the response in the aftermath. And interesting enough, I immediately became the poster child for the flood. In fact, one woman said to a media house that she told the people to vote for my predecessor. And if they had listened, the flooding would not have occurred. And I just found that very interesting. But suffice it to say, she also commented that she did not see her MP as yet. And I accept that everyone has an opinion and are free to express whatever opinions they want. Mr. Speaker, what was even more interesting was to see the member for Kalani, the leader of the opposition, making a pit stop in Pinewood, in my backyard, Mr. Speaker, in my backyard. He didn't check with me, didn't call me to say that he was coming. And you know what's interesting, member for St. Anne's, Mr. Speaker, through you? What was interesting, whenever I traveled with the Prime Minister anywhere, if the representative is not a PLP, you know what the Prime Minister does? He say, ensure that the member for that constituency is there. The member for North Eleuthera can attest to that. Absolutely. The member for South Abaco can attest to that. See, we don't play politics when it comes to managing the business of the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Yeah.
Call him next time, Daddy. Call him.
Mr. Speaker, the member showed up at the news crew in tow. He spent an hour and a half, and he ranted and raved about Christie late, Taylor is late, everybody late.
Well, see him since then?
No. No, he wasn't asleep, man. He knows it was raining. He knows it was raining. Mr. Speaker, when I started this political journey, my mother and I had a discussion, and she insisted that I remain above the fray and stay out of the mud which characterize politics in the Bahamas. In this case, Mr. Speaker, she called me and asked me if I heard the member from Kalani beating me up and beating the Prime Minister up. And I said, no, Mom, I didn't hear it. But she said, well, you better go and hear it and listen to it, watch it. And she said, anyway, son, go get him. You have my So, that's a mother's love. You know, nobody is going to beat up on her son unfairly and not allow him to defend himself.
You have your instructions.
I have my instructions. So I can get you for a couple of minutes, member. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to talk about the difference between the politics of politics and the politics of solutions and assistance. And real solutions that provide relief for the people. Mr. Speaker, through you, I would like to ask the member, or I'd like to let the member know that you can't show up for an hour and a half and then disappear. You have to come back. That shows you care. And that shows you're doing the politics of solutions.
The member was asked the question. The member for Kalani wants to answer the question. He rises. The member yields. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
First of all, the member said he didn't know when I went in. He heard it on the news. Wow. So how could he now assume that I didn't return? You know, that's all assumption. I did return. I walked all through. So I am quite aware.
Very well. Member for Pine Ridge, you may continue.
For the sake of moving on, I won't argue. Mr. Speaker, the morning after the storm, I mobilized at 6 a.m., first by calling the aid to the Prime Minister to make contact with Captain Stephen Russell to ensure that the resources of the government was being prepared to assess and provide initial assistance to the residents of Pinewood. The head of NEMA. Mr. Speaker, I have it on good authority that no such call was made by the member for Kalani or any other members of his party. I made the call. I made the call to ensure that NEMA was being, NEMA was prepared to tackle the issues that I know would result from the heavy rainfall. No member of the party called NEMA. Yes.
The member for St. Anne's rises on a point of order. The member yields. The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
Member sound like he knows what he's talking about. I can assure him, Mr. Speaker, I spoke with Captain Russell myself and invited him to come to St. Anne's. All right?
Very well. The member elucidates.
I know you call on my behalf.
I didn't run in St. Anne's.
I know you call on my behalf.
You were taking care of your constituent.
Yeah.
Good man. Hey, you are like me. Mr. Speaker, the member from St. Anne's is like me. He cares about his people.
Yeah, he cares about me.
Mr. Speaker,
in the Prime Minister's office responsible for investments, Kaylis Roll, the Pinewood MP, as we prepare now for this morning's session. And we will hear first from the member for Seabreeze, Minister of State in the Ministry of Transport and Aviation, Hope Strawn. Let's join Pastor Hugh Roach now for the invocation as members prepare to begin this morning's session. We welcome those from Radio 50.
For joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and bias that field. In the scrapbook by Egbert Hubbard, I have a quotation. It includes the ladies, but it's used in the generic sense, called 100-point men, or 100-point person. A 100-point person is one who is true to every trust, who keeps his word, who does not listen to insults, nor look for slights, who carries a civil tongue in his head, who is polite to strangers without being fresh, who is considerate towards servants, who is temperate in his eating and drinking, who is willing to learn, who is cautious yet courageous. Unquote. Let us pray. Great God and our Father, we acknowledge your sovereignty in all the world. We thank you for condescending and sending Jesus, your only begotten Son, to redeem all mankind. We accept his love and his sacrifice this morning and pray for his blessing. We thank you for the promise of sending the Spirit of truth, the Spirit of love, the Spirit of wisdom, the Spirit of courage. Send him in our house this morning, and bless our speaker and all those who will contribute to this debate today. Grant them correct figures, clarity of thought and expression, and Lord, may the deliberations today be on a high level so that your name might be glorified, your people will be edified, and you will get the glory. Thank you for hearing our prayer, which we offer in the name of Jesus, who taught us to pray together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning, honorable members. Today is June 10th, Monday, June 10th, in the year of our Lord 2013. And I welcome you to a continuation of this sitting of the Honorable House of Assembly. When we suspended our proceedings last, we had commenced debate at what was commonly referred to as the budget debate by way of second reading of the following appropriations bill. A bill for an act for the appropriation of divers sums of money foreign towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st of July 2013 and ending the 30th of June 2014. We were, as many, the chair had recognized the honorable member for Seabreeze. The member may now stand and intervene at this time. The chair recognized the honorable member for Seabreeze.
Obliged, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is wonderful to be in the land of the living, having enjoyed a wonderful Labor Day, the culmination of Sir Randall Fox Day forever in this country. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the good people of the Seabreeze constituency, thanking them once again for electing me to represent them. Mr. Speaker, the recent rains and floods were an unusual and unexpected phenomenon. The eastern end of New Providence was affected badly, including some areas in the Seabreeze constituency, like Lamumba Lane, parts of Imperial Park, parts of Sandilands Village Road, Seabreeze Lane, Bitterroot Street, and the areas south of Sir Charles Sanders Highway. Homes were damaged and people lost personal possessions. It was truly a time of testing for our people, and there was much reason for complaint, and indeed, we complained in large numbers. The opposition, in true form, took the opportunity to capitalize on the misery of people. But through it all, there is still much to be thankful for. In all of that perceived misery, there was not one life lost as a direct result of the rains and floods. When compared to what happened in the United States, in Texas and Alabama, and several other states, we have so much, Mr. Speaker, to be thankful for. We are a blessed people. The people affected by the floods are encouraged, where possible, to take advantage of the exigency order put in place by this caring PLP government. And I believe that the order is in place for 3 months. And so I would urge the persons in the Seabreeze constituency who need to take advantage of this order to work quickly. Mr. Speaker, my constituency report. Seabreeze is on the move. Since the 7th of May 2012, we have relocated our headquarters to Building Number 7, Sir Charles Saunders Highway. The Seabreeze Blowers, which is the name for our senior and junior basketball teams, competed in the Street Legends basketball tournament in the summer of 2012 against several other constituencies and non-political organizations.
Honorable members.
And Mr. Speaker, we won. We took home both trophies. The teams are again competing this year, and we are on a winning course. Mr. Speaker, my constituency hours are usually Thursday evenings from 6 p.m., although the office is open 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. weekdays. The office hours are subject to change, and the public will be notified of any such changes. We held our first annual tree lighting ceremony in December and regular monthly meetings at Sadie Curtis School, where we have had several guest speakers. The highlight of these meetings, however, was the visit by the police of the Eastern and Southeastern Divisions, who assisted us with information about protecting ourselves against crime. This Easter, Mr. Speaker, we held our first annual Fun Run Walk, our quarterly fundraiser, which was a South-Out, and for the young and young at heart, we held our yearly Easter egg hunt. During the time, we cleaned up several, during this term, Mr. Speaker, we cleaned up several problem areas in the constituency where indiscriminate dumping persists, and we want to appeal to those who continue to use the corner to the south of Sir Charles Sanders Highway in the vicinity of the eastern boundary of Sir Lyndon Pinling Estates and the vacant lot located Seabreeze Grove to cease and desist with this indiscriminate dumping. It attracts rats, rodents, and other disease-carrying vermin, thereby exposing the community to disease. It is an eyesore and downgrades the area, which otherwise is a testimony to the many folks who have struggled and attained middle-class status in that community. Mr. Speaker, several roads in the constituency have been paved, and a roadway on our major park is 80% completed, thanks to the member for Cat Island and the Ministry of Works. Bleachers are now being built on the park, and it is intended that the tennis courts would be refurbished soon and the rest of the park developed. The major drawback for the park is the absence of electricity, which I am actively pursuing. I will again be calling on the member for Cat Island and the Minister of Works to assist us with this project. I have already given him a wish list for the constituency. And since experience of fire in the same bushy area that I spoke about off Sir Charles Sanders Highway and the effects of the recent floods, I will be amending that wish list to include fire hydrants at strategic places in the constituency and the installation of drains in those areas susceptible to flooding. Our summer school begins soon, and we are looking to host scores of children for 2 to 3 weeks as we assist the parents of Seabreeze to keep our children positively engaged during the long summer break. Mr. Speaker, there is much more to be done in the constituency, and I am anticipating an even more productive fiscal year as we move forward 2013-2014. Mr. Speaker, In terms of general commentary on the budget, I want to submit the following. This budget is important to us as a government. This is our first opportunity to advance our agenda. The 2012-2013 budget that we debated in May last year was a tale of the Ingram administration's mismanagement of the Bahamian economy. Wastage and wanton abuse of public funds was the order of the day. It was a time of exploitation of the Bahamian patrimony. It was a time of a rotten-to-the-core deal which separated the Bahamian people from control of their beloved BTC. Cable and wireless got record-breaking profits, while the Bahamian people got lime. Mr. Speaker, lest we forget, lest the Bahamian people forget, some of those who did this are sitting immediately opposite us in this place. Yes. And there they should remain for many years to come.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, thank God we are nearing the end of the New Providence Road Improvement Project. That is another F&M disaster. The member for Cat Island, the Minister of Works, recently told the Bahamian people about some pipes that were ordered and purchased by the former government to put in the ground, but what turned out to be completely ill-fitted for the purpose. This mistake will add to the already $100 million over expenditure on the project. It is a natural disgrace. But Mr. Speaker, I thank God it is coming to an end. And roads will no longer dominate our national agenda. Mr. Speaker, this budget is our budget, our PLP government budget. This is the budget, Mr. Speaker, to secure the future for all Bahamians. This budget, Mr. Speaker, is the Charter for Governance budget, the beginning of the fulfillment of our plan, our PLP plan.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, it was delightful to watch the expressions on the faces of those opposite as the member for Centerville read the budget communication. It was priceless. As strategy after strategy was unveiled, plan after plan, initiative after initiative to secure the future of Bahamians, the expressions on the faces opposite became sadder and sadder.
Yes, by the minute.
They looked positively grieved and mournful. They were taken aback by the vision and the innovation of this budget. They hated the fact that we have come up with plans that will benefit the Bahamian people now and for the future.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, 2017 ain't looking too good for that side.
No.
But Mr. Speaker, you know, the budget didn't, you know, the innovation in the budget didn't stop them, though, from trying to fool the Bahamian people. They immediately launched a campaign of deception. They said that there is nothing, and I quote the word, nothing in this budget for the Bahamian people. That was another priceless moment, as one after the other, they lined up on TV to spin and to weave misinformation to the Bahamian people. The leader said, and that is their leader said, there was nothing there to address crime. But Mr. Speaker, if $2 million towards the purchase of additional police vehicles to fight crime is nothing, then I say give us nothing. If providing $175 million for the Defense Force to purchase a fleet of boats and to train officers is nothing, then I say give us some more nothing. Mr. Speaker, if making an allocation in the budget of $8 million to employ 450 additional Defense Force officers is nothing, I say bring me more nothing. If making financial provision for CCTV to be expanded all over our island is nothing, then nothing is what the Bahamian people want. Mr. Speaker, these lean times were created by those opposite, some of whom sat around the cabinet table and agreed to some of the most blatant, most obviously bad decisions made on behalf of the Bahamian people. These decisions derailed urban renewal at a critical time in its development. It set the country back in no small way in our crime prevention efforts. Mr. Speaker, this PLP government does not intend to adopt the attitude of the F&M predecessors. We have introduced Urban Renewal 2.0, an even more improved product. And we are putting our money behind urban renewal. This initiative has already been successful on many levels in the constituencies where the program is ongoing. It has never been more obvious that this PRP government is serious about our obligation to keep the Bahamian people safe. I get the impression from those opposite and many of those who wield the poison pen in this country that they are prepared to see this country destroyed by crime once it decreases the PRP's chances of winning the next elections. They do a marvelous job of paying lip service, of waxing eloquent about working together when they know they have absolutely not the slightest intention of doing so. Anyone who is serious about working with the government to solve crime would applaud the provisions in this budget for urban renewal, the police, and the defense force. Mr. Speaker, it cannot be denied that crime is at an unacceptable level. The proliferation of guns and the wanton disregard for life has consumed a goodly number of our populace. Unfortunately, it is annihilating some of our most precious resources, our young men. It is sad to see, Mr. Speaker, and hear about the vortex of violence. But the fact is, we are confronted with it every day. 2, 3 murders per day now is the norm. The question being asked, Mr. Speaker, by our citizens is what has gone wrong? Where is all of this anger and violence coming from? Of course, Mr. Speaker, there are many theories. Mr. Speaker, I was speaking with a family member, a young male doctor, just the other day, who was bemoaning the carnage of the countless young men who have succumbed to injuries inflicted through knives and guns in recent years. He pointed out how the cycle of violence is perpetuating itself. Mr. Speaker, and this is how it perpetuates itself. A young man murders another. The victim leaves behind fatherless children, sons to be exact. They grow up without the care and nurturing of a father, and they become angry. The murderer then goes to prison to languish for the rest of his natural life, or the better part of it, in a stinking 10 by 10 cell in Fox Hill Prison. He leaves children, a son or two. They grow up without the love of a father and without the necessary positive male guidance. The family structure and all that it is supposed to represent has failed them. They grow angry and they grow bitter. They become easy prey to anyone who, as the young people say, can run a good game. Their own lives and the lives of others become of little consequence, and the cycle of anger and violence then continues. Many are asking now, Mr. Speaker, where are all the guns coming from? But, Mr. Speaker, you know something? We don't manufacture guns in this country. One thing we know for sure is that they are coming from someplace foreign. People outside our borders are arming our citizens to do harm to each other. And we are stupid enough to let them do it. 40 years after we struggled for majority rule and for equality in our country, we are becoming slaves to greed and avarice. That is what is fueling this monster called crime. When you break it down, whether it be drugs, or a flat screen TV, or a computer, or the latest phone, or a car, or a big house, it is just simply greed. Coupled with a warped sense of entitlement, a defunct value system, and a non-belief in the biblical admonition that by the sweat of your brow you shall eat. Mr. Speaker, it is time for the young men in this country to wake up and recognize that they have a responsibility to live and to help to develop this country. I know we women can do it. We've proven ourselves time and time again. But it is time for all hands on deck. Mr. Speaker, if our young men continue to abdicate their responsibility to themselves, their families, and to their country, all of that we have achieved in the last 40 years may be lost. Mr. Speaker, there is 100,000 square miles of ocean, the 700 islands, reefs, and keys with thousands of miles of coastline, which make up this archipelago called the Bahamas, makes for pretty porous borders, which are near impossible to adequately police. But police them we must. It is critical at this time that we be clear, unequivocal, and unwavering in our immigration policies and our measures to stem the tide of illegal immigrants and illegal weapons, which is threatening our very way of life. Mr. Speaker, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, the position that the Honorable Member for Fox Hill has taken with respect to immigration, I support 100%.
Yes, new sheriff in town.
Mr. Speaker, we need the additional personnel for the defense and police forces, and we need those ships that Bain and Grantstown had the gall to ask the Cabinet for.
Yes.
And which the Cabinet, Mr. Speaker, had the temerity to grant.
Right, that's right.
Despite the huge capital investment, I believe the Bahamian people understand implicitly that we are trying to protect them and to preserve our own sovereignty.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I believe this is an appropriate time to thank the Commissioner Greenslade, Commodore Roderick Bull, the Director of Immigration, and the cadre of men and women who work diligently to protect the citizens of this country. If you want to know the value of these agents to our national security and personal safety, imagine living in an environment where you don't have access to them. So, Mr. Speaker, I also think that it is important, too, at this time to thank all in our country who accept and acknowledge their duty to assist in the maintenance of law and order in our society by abiding by the law themselves, reporting breaches of the law where they occur, and carrying out their civic duty as jurors. This is an essential component in our criminal justice system, but it calls for great sacrifice. Mr. Speaker, as the opposition, as I indicated after the budget was delivered and they went on their press coverage of deception, and they continued to criticize the budget presentation, and they spun and they wove in the most disingenuous fashion. They said that the family islands were being neglected by this PLP government. Mr. Speaker, when I heard that, I almost fell out of my chair. I couldn't believe it, because when the member for Centerville delivered his address and talked about all of the initiatives that we had for the family islands, how could that translate into there was not enough for the family islands? Mr. Speaker, there's a saying by George Bernard Shaw. It says, and I quote, "Beware of false knowledge. It is more dangerous than ignorance."
That's right.
End quote. Mr. Speaker, schools are scheduled to be built in Inagua, San Salvador, Los Andres, and Gregorytown. It is clear then that the opposition is prepared to perpetuate false knowledge. And as George Bernard Shaw says, this is more dangerous than ignorance. They are fulfilling their mandate, though, Mr. Speaker, and that is to oppose for the sake of opposing. Mr. Speaker, our commitment to the family islands is further demonstrated by the many hospitals which are being built on Cat Island and South Eleuthera. According to the opposition, again, this is nothing or not enough. I bet the persons, Mr. Speaker, who will be able to access the medical services, though, they won't say that that is nothing. They're gonna recognize the value of having a mini hospital on the island. Yes. Mr. Speaker, the member for Centerville and the member for Golden Isles, you know, Mr. Speaker, there's two smart men now.
Oh, it's a good combination.
Oh boy, I tell you.
Best combination we have.
The member for Centerville and the member for Golden Isles are of the view
that was the voice in
that the economy is on the rebound.
That was the voice combination.
Mr. Speaker, I know the opposition doesn't want to hear this. But I believe the Bahamian people can trust the word of these two men. Yes. They have a history.
That's right.
Between 2002 and 2007, they proved their competence in managing our economy, in creating 22,000 jobs and creating economic growth. Forgive me, Mr. Speaker, if I choose to believe them instead of the F&M spin doctors and the former failed ministers of finance. Unlike their predecessors in office, Centerville and Golden Isles both know the difference between 49% and 51%. Mr. Speaker, this rebounding of the economy has inspired our Prime Minister to invest in our youth in a big way. $10 million is allocated towards constructing multi-purpose sporting facilities on several of the family islands. Aside from the obvious benefits to youth development, this creates employment and other opportunity for our people in the family islands. Can it truly be said that there is nothing in this budget for the family islands? I don't think so.
The blind man can see that.
Since the nothing argument can't hold water, though, some of those opposite have reverted to saying that we ain't doing enough. Mr. Speaker, the opposition wants their cake, and they want to eat it too. It's ridiculous. Everyone present in this honorable House and in the wider viewing and listening audience knows that the government's resources are limited. The debt to GDP ratio was increased to unacceptable levels under the F&M administration. They should man up to their misdeeds, man up to putting this economy in dire straits. Their wanton mismanagement of the economy has put us in the position where 1 out of every $4, Mr. Speaker, of revenue is being spent on servicing debt. That's where they put us.
Yes.
Their ill-conceived fiscal policy was to tax, spend. First of all, they borrow, and they tax, and they spend. And then when they run out of that, they tax some more, borrow some more, and spend some more. That was their fiscal policy.
Borrow, tax, spend.
To top all of that off, Mr. Speaker, the majority of the $512 billion we borrowed since coming to office in May of 2012 was to pay the F&M government's mountain of debt that was hidden here, there, and everywhere. So this story about borrowing $1 billion, yeah, that's true. We have had to borrow $1 billion. But half of it is for debt the F&M left behind. That's the crux of the matter. They have absolutely no shame, Mr. Speaker, when they continue to repeat that.
None.
But, Mr. Speaker, I'm tired of telling them that the Bahamian people aren't fools. They see them coming from a mile off. The present borrowing, Mr. Speaker, which we and our government is doing, of $465 million, is finally for PLP plans and policies.
Yes.
What we intend to do with the money has been clearly articulated by the Right Honorable Prime Minister, the member for Centerville. And we are putting Bahamians first and securing our future.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, the farming project for Andros is another innovative family island initiative.
Talk about it, though.
For years and years, the Bahamian people, the public, and the private sector, local and international agencies have been complaining about expanding the Bahamian economy.
Yes.
Every time they talked about expanding the economy, agriculture was heralded as a very important component in accomplishing this goal. Our dependence on food imports has created food security issues for us. But this project is important to our very survival. Mr. Speaker, this government did not just decide to throw some money for the provision of some crops of agricultural equipment at farmers, although it is fair to say that this is an important component in creating a successful industry. But, Mr. Speaker, this government has decided to create a farming industry around the framework of education and as an adjunct to the College of the Bahamas, soon to be the University of the Bahamas.
Yes.
The focus is on capacity building, research, and knowledge, all of which are able to be utilized and transferred for immediate benefit to the Bahamian people. Thus, in this one initiative, Mr. Speaker, we have killed 3 birds with 1 stone.
Tell them.
We have moved on doubling our investment in education.
There you go. Let them know.
We have tackled our promise made at page 94 of our Charter for Governance, where we said that we will grow what we can and buy what we must.
Yes.
And it is anticipated that this venture will make a 15% dent in our food imports.
Yes.
And the third prong that we have tackled is that we have broadened our revenue base significantly and we have diversified our economy through this one initiative.
Yes. And they should have $4 million being spent.
Mr. Speaker, the money being put into this farming school and the special education facilities is a good opportunity to put to rest the opposition's claim that we have cut our investment in education. $30 million towards these initiatives, together with the commitment to attain university status for the College of the Bahamas, is no chump change.
Yes.
I think the opposition should rethink their message. This is an extremely significant initiative, and it is long overdue.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about tackling unemployment. Mr. Speaker, next to crime, unemployment is the greatest challenge for the government. Again, those opposite can be heard singing the same tune that they have been doing for the last year. They keep repeating that we said that we would create 10,000 jobs. Mr. Speaker, you know what I say? Stay tuned.
That's it. Tell them. Stay on the move.
So far,
Stay tuned.
in their typical deceitful way, they have refused to accept that unemployment has actually decreased since we came to office. Despite the fact, Mr. Speaker, that statistics are compiled by the same government agency that they relied on during their time in office. Facts are facts, Mr. Speaker. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? Facts are stubborn.
Yes.
I am confident and convinced that this budget provides ample opportunity for us to create employment for our people. People will be employed in Andros to work the farms. They will be employed to build the greenhouses on the family islands and in urban renewal centers in Nassau. They will be employed to build the mini hospitals on the family islands. The Defense Force is getting hundreds of recruits. School repairs mean hundreds of jobs.
Yes.
It is foreshadowed that there will be hundreds who will be employed in the small home repair project and in the Ministry of Housing's affordable home construction sector, which has been allocated some $10 million from NIB. And then, Mr. Speaker, we have more jobs where the judges' residences are being refurbished. So, as I said, stay tuned.
Yes.
Stay tuned, Mr. Speaker. I did say earlier that's what the opposition should do. Mr. Speaker, the National Training Agency, I believe, though, is the most important and groundbreaking initiative for employment creation. However, the establishment of this agency is revolutionary. It is a program aimed at readying our people to meet the job demands of the public and the private sector. Mr. Speaker, for so many years, the Bahamian people have been hearing that they are too unskilled.
Yes.
You know, I ain't trained. You need training for the job. You know, we got to give the job to some other people because you don't have the training. This agency, Mr. Speaker, will move towards putting paid to that claim. It is intended that the employment needs of the hotel sector, the construction sector, including particular skill sets, the financial services sector, and the agricultural sector will be met. Training should produce cadres of skilled and trained workers. It is essential to the survival of the Bahamas and that Bahamians are able to share in the economic pie. Sorry, FNM, this one trumps your very expensive, failed 52-week program. Mr. Speaker, I want to now digress to, or I should say, get to the main part of my contribution, which is to talk about the ministry in which I am involved, which is the Ministry of Transport and Aviation. This is a very dynamic ministry. As the Minister of State in that ministry, which is led by the member for Anguston, there is great opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to the future positive development of our country. The creation of policies for the civil aviation, maritime, and road transport sectors is integral to what defines us as a people. Chaos and disorder in these sectors would negatively impact us on every level. Danger is inherent in the movement of people via the varied modes of transportation and as pedestrians. The government's principal responsibility to keep our citizens safe is as true for the transportation industry as it is for crime. As people move around our islands utilizing one or more of the available modes of transportation, there are national and international standards that must be established and adhered to. The Ministry of Transport and Aviation and its numerous agencies are charged with the responsibility to ensure such standards are met. Through the efforts of a cadre of committed technocrats and the administrative guidance of our Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Lorraine and Brister, we are working tirelessly to ensure compliance. Road safety awareness, Mr. Speaker. The Road Traffic Department is lagging behind and requires a complete overhaul. But even here, we are on course to create a safer environment by having established the National Road Safety Committee, which is charged with the responsibility of educating the public about road safety. The Bahamas has adopted the United Nations Decade for Safety. It is aimed at reducing road traffic fatalities and catastrophic injuries caused by road traffic accidents. Road traffic accidents are far too prevalent, and in recent times we have seen an increase in fatalities in the family islands. To date, for the year 2013, there have been 29 fatalities in the Bahamas, 12 of them in New Providence and 7 in Eleuthera. and in the other islands, mostly you have one here or two there. Per capita, Mr. Speaker, and this is a phenomenon, Eleuthera has the highest fatality rate per capita in the Bahamas. This is unacceptable. It has become a public health crisis. The Ministry of Transport and Aviation has partnered with the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Education, the Rotary Club, and the One Eleuthera Foundation to address the problems through a public-private partnership. It is intended that improvements will be made to infrastructure, signage, and other educational initiatives, including ads, school visits, and town meetings. These initiatives are intended to be employed in Nassau, also to raise awareness for road safety. But, Mr. Speaker, speed has been identified as the major cause of traffic accidents and fatalities here and in the Family Islands. Other factors are drunk driving and distracted driving. These factors are common throughout the world. But notwithstanding this, we must be cognizant of the fact that, like crime, catastrophic road traffic accidents affect the world's view of our society. It speaks to how far we are advanced in our civilization and development. On the U.S. State Department's website, the commentary about road safety in the Bahamas was very telling and indicated to me that we have been found wanting. And, Mr. Speaker, I will quote what is on that website because I believe it is very important for us, not only in the ministry, to know what is being said about us in terms of this particular part of how we govern our country. And I quote what is posted on the website, and this is just an extract of the total. Quote, many motorists disobey traffic control devices. This is they're describing the road traffic situation in the Bahamas. Many motorists disobey traffic control devices to include stop signs, speed limits, and traffic signals. Police enforcement of traffic law is minimal, and visitors driving on the roadways should use caution. While it is against the law, drinking and driving is common and rarely enforced, resulting in numerous traffic accidents and fatalities, including those involving tourists and scooters. End quote. Mr. Speaker, when I first saw that commentary, I have to say that my patriotic juices started to flow, and I was somewhat offended. But upon deeper reflection, the statement is very instructive, exposing our weaknesses on so many levels. It was quite compelling. It forces us, Mr. Speaker, to accept some ugly truths about our shortcomings and the critical need to educate, improve awareness, and to become more resolute in the enforcement of our laws. Mr. Speaker, another initiative we have undertaken to educate the public about road safety is the creation of a Facebook page called the National Road Safety Committee Bahamas, where current information on statistics, the official road safety code, articles and commercials on road safety are posted. We want to invite Bahamians everywhere to visit this site and to like the page. We also invite your participation by posting your thoughts, advice, and suggestions as we jointly endeavor to interact with each other and to educate the general public on this very important part of our lives. Mr. Speaker, we have successfully launched our billboard campaign warning drivers of the dangers of texting or using cell phones while driving. And Mr. Speaker, I have to say this is a hard one. It's a very hard one to be disciplined in that way. And I find the only way to be disciplined is to throw the phone in the back of the car somewhere and close up the bag. Because once that phone is anywhere in sight, and that rings or that text or the buzzer goes off or something, you have a tendency to be distracted and look at it. And so I am finding that I am, fighting to discipline myself. And I'm hoping that the majority of Bahamians will understand that any kind of distracted driving is not good. And certainly just using the cell phone or any kind of technological handheld device is frowned upon and should not be done. The billboards were as a result of a public-private partnership. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the sponsors of those billboards and to encourage more of the private sector to become involved with the committee in spreading the word about road safety. The life you save may actually be your own. Mr. Speaker, in partnership with the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Ministry and the Road Traffic Department held an exhibition on road safety at the mall at Marathon, where we offered information to the general public on road safety and road regulations. Superintendent Ken Strawn of the Royal Bahamas Police Force is to be commended for his recreation of a catastrophic traffic accident, the effect of which was to sensitize the public to the carnage and suffering these catastrophic accidents cause. Gratitude is extended to the Transportation Policy and Planning Unit of the Road Traffic Department, in particular Ms. Karen Mortimer, the consummate professional, one who is most passionate about her work. Thanks are also extended to all other members of the committee that contribute to our efforts towards fostering a culture of safety, which are the watchwords for the Ministry of Transport and Aviation, a culture of safety. Mr. Speaker, the Road Traffic Act is also undergoing presently a complete overhaul, and this was necessary after the comprehensive changes were made to our road infrastructure under the New Providence Road Improvement Project. Public consultations are likely to begin in the near future. Mr. Speaker, the Road Traffic Department is an important revenue collection agency for the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Its present overall functioning, though, leaves much to be desired. The complaints by customers who have to apply for and pay for driver's licenses, car licensing, car inspection, public service licenses, etc. abound. Both complaints abound, Mr. Speaker, and almost on a daily basis. The premises for staff and customers alike are inadequate and in bad condition. There are staff shortages and a lack of automation which creates inefficiencies in the provision of services. There is no doubt whatsoever, Mr. Speaker, that there is a need for improvement. But it is contemplated, Mr. Speaker, and so I say a big but. It is contemplated that in this coming fiscal year, efforts will be made to automate and improve the system. This will be a welcome relief to our ministry, the department, and the general public. It is likely to result in an overall improvement in the collection of revenue as the loopholes which encourage irregular and dishonest practices are closed. Yes. Mr. Speaker, automation of this department is part of this government's overall commitment to increase capacity within the public sector, its commitment to revenue, and to improve the collection of revenue overall. I am hopeful, Mr. Speaker, that despite the significant capital commitments of the government, this will be accomplished for this fiscal period. Mr. Speaker, there is a project in the Ministry of Transport and Aviation that has been hanging around for some time, but which Minister Hannah Martin has indicated her resolute position in terms of us getting it
Member
completed.
for Angliston.
The member for Angliston. Mr. Speaker, the unification of the bus system is also a huge, long overdue undertaking that our ministry is hoping to achieve in the near future. Oh boy. As we speak, an update of the 2008 report, which outlines a plan for implementation, is being completed. It will reassess and revalue components of the plan. Initial consultations with the industry stakeholders suggest, and Mr. Speaker, lo and behold, and we were surprised, initial consultations with the industry stakeholders suggest widespread support for this major initiative.
That's excellent. That's excellent.
They recognize the need to improve and modernize their way of doing business if the sector is to keep pace with their counterparts worldwide. Whether we are able to transition smoothly and without significant objection will depend on the industry stakeholders and will likely depend on the finite details and the acceptance of their role in an integrated public-private unified bus system. So we have the initial support, Mr. Speaker, and they said that they are waiting for the details which should come out of the report which is presently being compiled. And hopefully once we're able to do that, we'll sit down with them, sit down with the stakeholders, and we would try to forge a way forward that is amenable and acceptable to all parties.
Excellent.
In the meantime, and until we have full authorization to proceed, we are working to improve the product we have. We have partnered with the Royal Bahamas Police Force, who has assured us of their commitment to increase their vigilance of jitney buses in particular and public transportation in general. The ministry is also increasing its complement of road traffic officers and supervisors as we speak, whose mandate will be to assist on a day-to-day basis in the ensuring strict compliance of the Road Traffic Act and regulations by drivers and owners. It is our ministry's intention to weed out those bus drivers and franchise owners who refuse to obey the laws and the regulations by which the industry is governed. People want a safe, reliable, affordable public bus system, and we at the Ministry of Transport and Aviation are committed to delivering this. Mr. Speaker, work is being done in our ministry in conjunction with the City of New Providence, I believe it is called, Improvement Committee. Some people call it the Downtown Improvement Committee. And that work is towards a pilot project that aims to minimize traffic congestion on Bay Street and the surrounding areas. The pilot will introduce a park and ride shuttle system which will allow jitney passengers to disembark and alight at various park and ride terminals situated off of Bay Street. This will obviate the need for the hundreds of jitneys to traverse Bay Street daily just for customers to transfer. This pilot is well on in its planning stage, and it is hoped that it will be supported by all stakeholders involved, especially those who are in the jitney business. More information will become available to the public as we progress in our plans. Mr. Speaker, the Post Office is also under the Ministry of Transport and Aviation, and I want to touch on that briefly. Mr. Speaker, the Post Office is struggling for relevance against the revolutionary email and instant messaging technology. These are the preferred means of communication nowadays. While these modes will probably continue... These are the preferred means of communication nowadays. While these modes will probably continue to erode the viability of postal services, certain types of mail delivery like overnight courier services and online purchase delivery service which remain popular and vital to the communications matrix. There are private-public partnerships that can be developed to create new streams of revenue for the post office. Overnight courier services and online shopping are an untapped market that offers the potential for significant revenue intake. It is anticipated that this will provide the impetus needed to assist with the modernization of the post office. Mr. Speaker, the Philatelic Bureau, which is the production of stamps, continues not only to be an essential service for the mail delivery system, but it has, through time, provided a platform from which we are able to showcase the heroes and heroines of our country and those who have, through their accomplishments, woven into the fabric of the Bahamian ethos. It is also an avenue for us to mark and celebrate significant milestones and events in our country's development. Since coming to office in May 2012, we have had several significant stamp issues, including the heroines of the women's suffrage movement, our Olympic heroes and heroines issue, and recently the Royal Bahamas Police Force Band celebrated its anniversary. I think it's the 120th anniversary. An exciting offering is soon to be launched for this 40th anniversary of independence, which is sure to delight all, especially those who are avid stamp collectors. And that will be revealed with time. Mr. Speaker, both the budgets of the ministry and several of its agencies have been cut. There's no doubt about it. Prior to producing the budget, the Minister of Finance admonished us months ago of the need to trim the fat in our various ministries, to tighten our belts, and to increase our adherence to fiscal discipline.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, for the life of me, I can't imagine why the opposition would be opposed to this. Unless, of course, they are opposing again for the sake of opposing. So, we have trimmed the fat, and we shall see what we shall see. In closing, Mr. Speaker, in this budget we demonstrated, this government demonstrated our commitment to the Bahamian people within the framework and context of prudent fiscal oversight and management of our economy, fulfilling our national mandate, and at the same time satisfying international credit rating agencies such as Moody's that we are on the right track.
Oh, yeah.
It is reported, Mr. Speaker, that they said that our budget, and I quote, hit all the right notes. And Mr. Speaker, I cannot sing, but I know when something sounds good. So if Moody's say we hit all the right notes, we sounding good.
Good, that's right.
Mr. Speaker, this budget at this time in our country led me to think about our PLP party and the principles upon which it was founded.
Oh, you're talking of.
I thought of the father of our nation and the great men of his time who stood together to forge a future for our people, a future full of hope, of dreams and aspirations.
That's why we got hope.
Mr. Speaker, I thought of how they truly believed in us and committed themselves to wiping every tear from every eye. Mr. Speaker, my heart was glad. I thought, we are finally back on track. Perry Gladstone Christie, the Right Honorable Member for Centerville, and this generation of leaders, all of us who you see here, we too have an unequivocal commitment to the Bahamian people. We too believe in Bahamians. We too are determined to help the many, not the few. And we too are determined to wipe every tear from every eye. So, Mr. Speaker, as we celebrate 40 years of independence, let us, as our forefathers did, continue to hold fast to our belief in our people. Let us work towards the fulfillment of their dreams and aspirations. If we do this, Mr. Speaker, I am convinced, as my maternal grandmother used to say, angels couldn't ask for more. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support this progressive, growth-creating PLP government budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Central and South Eleuthera.
Yeah. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank my constituents, the good people of Central and South Eleuthera, for their confidence and support over the last year. I also wish to repeat my thanks to the Right Honourable Member for Centerville for his confidence reposed in the Honourable Attorney General and me over the last 12 months. This first year in office has been as challenging as the enormity of the honor of serving our great country. Mr. Speaker, I remain convinced that our best days lie ahead of us, and that to secure our patrimony, we must prepare and secure it for our grandchildren, children, and indeed us today. In the words of A Charter for Governance, Believe in the Bahamas, page 50, protecting our future was a theme that was struck. And this budget repeats that theme. Indeed, it seeks to steady our fiscal course while growing our economy for the benefit of present and future Bahamians. I rise today, Mr. Speaker, to inform this House that Central and South Eleuthera supports the budget communication and each of the following pieces of legislation and the resolution to borrow $450 million. The legislation which undergirds the budgetary communication are as follows: the Customs Management Amendment Bill 2013, the Customs Management Regulations 2013, the Passenger Tax Amendment to First Schedule Order 2013, the Family Island Development Encouragement Extension of Time Order 2013, the Family Islands Development Encouragement Amendment Act 2013, the Electricity Amendment Bill 2013, the Bahamas Maritime Authority Amendment Bill 2013, the Utilities Regulation and Competition Authority Amendment Bill 2013, the Clifton Heritage Authority Amendment Bill 2013, the Bridge Authority Amendment Bill 2013, the Bahamas Customs Excise Act 2013. Mr. Speaker, this litany of legislative measures evidences our government's commitment to a detailed, fiscally prudent management of our country's affairs. Indeed, in speaking with the technical officers in my ministry, this is said to be the first budget communication that had attendant to it such a large number of legislative measures. I wish to thank the members of the drafting unit and the Law Reform Commission who have tirelessly worked over a short, truncated period to ensure that the bills which were presented today were in a state of readiness for presentation. Mr. Speaker, much of what we do appears so effortless, but it is supported and produced by faceless employees to the public whose dedication and service needs to be repeated at every possible opportunity. And to those persons in the drafting unit and the Law Reform Commission, I wish to personally thank for their dedication over the last year. It has been a great pleasure to work with such committed persons who turn up to work in an understaffed environment, knowing that their workload is far greater than it ought to be. But their professionalism, their enthusiasm, their patriotism must never, ever be forgotten. And I wish to thank them publicly this morning. Some might say, Mr. Speaker, that finally, at long last, our country formally embarks on a Christie administration's economic agenda for growth, predicated, planned, and prudent economic growth undergirded by policy development. Yes. I wish to go on record this morning, Mr. Speaker, as commending both the Right Honourable Member for Centreville and my good friend and colleague, the Member of Parliament for Golden Isles. In my congratulations to them and in my support of them, I wish, first of all, to remind this honorable chamber and the public at large that 1 year ago, just 3 weeks upon becoming the government of the Bahamas, we were faced with the consequences of profligate, spendthrift, fiscal, imprudent economic policies, which left our available credit at $3 million. The stark, crass reality of insane economic, unsustainable forays by our predecessors left us in the nightmarish reality that borrow, spend, borrow, tax, and sell could only depress our beleaguered economy, which was struggling to lift from the ravages of the global recession between 2007 and 2009. And Mr. Speaker, we came to office on the eve of the budget debate for the last fiscal year. The preparations for that budget were well nigh complete when we were elected. Most of that budget, close to 100% of it, were predicated on contractual commitments which the Free National Movement Administration had entered into prior to that budget. It would not only have been illegal for us to stop, review, and cancel contractual obligations that had been legally entered into by our predecessors. And so, to a large extent, Mr. Speaker, their criticism of our borrowing over the period last year is self-criticism. Self-criticism. It amounts to a confession.
Oh, Lord. Aggie. It's Aggie.
It is a guilty plea.
Oh, boy.
Belated as it was, as the public had already convicted them and sentenced them to 5 years in opposition.
2017.
Mr. Speaker,
We get probation.
very, very early in our administration, we were personally warned by members of a delegation of the International Monetary Fund of the unsustainability of the economic policies of our predecessors, the Free National Movement, and of the need to curb deficit spending and the manner in which we were going about borrowing as if tomorrow there was no need to repay. This budget presented this year clearly heeds the sage advice which we had received as it seeks to raise taxes by closing the highway through which real property tax dodgers have succeeded in evading their tax liability. Mr. Speaker, this budget seeks to be fair in its imposition of taxes, to avoid taxing those who can least afford to be taxed, and to ensure that those of us who are capable of paying taxes pay our fair share of those taxes. No government wishes to impose taxes unnecessarily. And all governments would do so cautiously and deliberately, knowing that taxes are by their very nature, Mr. Speaker, unpopular. Simply put, at some point, we as a country had to face up to the reality that we cannot spend with complete indifference as to how the money which we commit to spend is going to come into our coffers. Sadly, this administration was left with very, very little wiggle room. The cost of further borrowings increased by the downgrades, repeated downgrades in our ratings abroad, in our credit ratings abroad, brought on by the irresponsibility of members opposite. I say this, Mr. Speaker, because we have had a period in which record levels of borrowing have gone unabated with little or no regard to the economic realities that unsustainable economic policies can lead to disastrous consequences. I often tell my friends that I remember as a schoolboy when the Jamaican dollar, one Jamaican dollar was worth more than 2 United States dollars. As of this weekend, the Jamaican dollar is worth 1 US cent.
Really?
It's 100 to 1.
What? Jeez.
And it didn't happen by accident, Mr. Speaker. That disastrous plummet from the fortunes of wealth to the depths of decadence and despair, poverty, came about through the sort of recklessness that members opposite exhibited over the last 5 years. And we would have been crazy, downright irresponsible, if we would sit back and continue down that perilous climb. Mr. Speaker, as a member of Parliament, as a member of the Cabinet, I regard public office as a sacred trust. And I will not, cannot, sit idly by and watch while others lead us into disaster. It is not by accident that I am on the same side as the Right Honourable Member for Farm Road. Centerville, sorry. I heeded his call when he was not even leader of our great party, because I believed in the fiscally prudent course which I knew he believed in. I believed, and still believe, in the social programs advocated by our great party over many, many years. And so, Mr. Speaker, I have very, very little difficulty in trusting the Right Honourable Member for Centerville. And that trust is rewarded every day with evidence of it having been properly placed. And sometimes I look at him wondering about his fatigue, knowing that he spends much time at much physical sacrifice to himself doing the people's business. It is a travesty that the human concern that he has for our public is not evidenced in sufficiently good measure in the public press. And I wish to thank and join the member for Fox Hill in his criticism of those who would belittle our efforts. And they do it to such an extent, Mr. Speaker, that when we do good things, it is as if nothing at all had happened. And so, Mr. Speaker, let us look at some of the measures which this budget brings in. For many, many, many years, real property tax has been a plague in collection terms. At one point, we had outstanding real property taxes in the hundreds of millions of dollars. There's no point in having a law on the books and ignoring it. But that is precisely what has happened in real terms by too large a segment of our community. And this is a matter that has been commented on by members opposite when they have held the reins of power. But not much has been done effectively to close what must be viewed as a gaping highway through which coffers are not being filled. The amendment to the real property tax bill focuses on commercial loans. We have determined initially to pursue real property taxes in a focused way in the commercial sector. Mortgagees in commercial loans are now required to pay outstanding real property tax within 90 days of the liability to pay real property taxes and surcharges relating thereto. The loophole of evasion is tightened because the failure on the mortgagee to pay the outstanding tax within 90 days granted for payment by the mortgagee is followed by the loss of the right to a contribution or an indemnity which would otherwise be available to such a mortgagee against its defaulting mortgagor, who has the primary obligation to pay real property tax on the mortgaged property. Mr. Speaker, this is part of our seriousness, our commitment, our political will, questioned by Moody's in November of last year. But the resolute and steel-like focus of this administration should not be taken for granted any longer. I anticipate that this measure by itself will assist the Ministry of Finance considerably in quickly collecting identifiable outstanding real property taxes in this fiscal year. Members opposite, more particularly Finance, seem to be critical of this amendment. And I said seem to be because, Mr. Speaker, this is not a new type of provision. Indeed, during the entirety of the 1990s, a similar provision was enacted and enforced, and it was intended to capture outstanding real property taxes at the sale of mortgaged properties. Members opposite were in power, I might remind them, between 1992 and 2002, and again, sadly, between 2007 and 2012. In the 15 years in which they held the reins of government, they made no attempt to repeal the similarly aimed legislative provisions which had enabled their administrations, Mr. Speaker, to more readily access real property taxes which were outstanding. I can think of no real basis for any criticism of this administration in insisting on real property taxes being paid, and particularly in the commercial sector where persons are making money from these properties. Mr. Speaker, business license fees for banks have been raised. The intent is to raise revenue by treating banks in the same way as insurance companies are taxed. What's so radical about that? The additional tax is on a sector which can well afford to pay a fairer share of the tax burden than it has previously done. And this is a sector, Mr. Speaker, which takes its profits untaxed in this jurisdiction, takes its profits untaxed in this jurisdiction to other jurisdictions where those very profits are taxed by other governments. In the United States, the tax is as high as 40%. And so, Mr. Speaker, money that was earned in our country is being used to build hospitals, schools, roads. Other public capital works programs are funded off of the backs of Bahamian consumers. How can members opposite truly be critical of us asking the banking sector to pay a fairer share and to help in defraying the cost of providing the commercial environment in which they so readily thrive? Mr. Speaker, I'm amazed. But then, Mr. Speaker, it may well be that they were saying to themselves, why didn't we think of that?
Put on a room.
You know, Mr. Speaker, government requires funding to provide the amenities and facilities which we enjoy in our community. And there are only two known sources of revenue for the government. You either raise it through taxes and fees, or you borrow. And members are opposite, having made borrowing a far more expensive proposition, left our administration with no or little choice but to seek to claw back from our community by way of increased taxes, the taxes which we have imposed in this budget. And we have done so, Mr. Speaker, because the children in Gregory Town need to go to school. The children in North Eleuthera High need to go to school. A school building burnt down by arson still needs to be rebuilt. A school destroyed in a hurricane needs to be rebuilt. It isn't going to get there unless someone pays for the construction. The money to pay for the construction must either come from taxes or borrowing. It's as simple as that, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I speak for a community which between 1992 and 2002 was completely ignored. Yep. Lest anyone forget in this place, Hurricane Andrew in 1992 completely wiped out docking facilities from South Eleuthera straight up to north. The length and breadth of Eleuthera was ravaged. Ravaged, I say. The dock in Rock Sound into oblivion. And even today, Mr. Speaker, as they cry crocodile tears for Family Islands, the evidence of their neglect is in the fact that I have to now put the dock in Rock Sound back to where it was.
You gonna pay for that?
We.
Government. People in the Bahamas.
But I will remind members opposite that between 1992 and 2002, South Eleuthera was represented by a member of parliament who sat with members opposite. Nothing was done. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, and between 2002 and 2007, Mr. Oswald Ingram, the former Speaker, was the Member of Parliament. And while we were in government, what he did do, because we had the same situation that we face now, was we spurred the private sector, and we were deprived of a second term. Then I am sure the Right Honourable Member for Centreville would have remedied the historical problem which had been left by members opposite. But this term, we will do it, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, we will not be distracted from our duty to our public. Our commitment to the people who people these isles is legendary. And this budget shows that we are responsible and that they can be secure in that responsibility. Mr. Speaker, such was the paucity of economic thought in the side opposite that they themselves must be seen as having given up on providing any private sector economic opportunities to our country as a whole. I say that, Mr. Speaker, because they embarked, albeit on the eve of an election, on a subsidy-driven jobs program, whereby for 52 weeks, the government of the Bahamas, strapped for cash, would borrow to subsidize the employment of persons who would otherwise not be able to be employed because the businesses didn't have the funds with which to pay for those employees. The reality was, Mr. Speaker,
Don't train them to do something.
the reality, Mr. Speaker, is that the program provided no diploma, no certificate, nothing
In opposition.
that these persons who were working under the program would be enabled to go and seek employment elsewhere on the strength of some skill that they may well have been fortunate enough to gain during the 52-week program. Indeed, there was no statutory basis upon which anyone could have looked at such an employee as a comfort. Well, this was a scheme designed for training. It was, Mr. Speaker, it was perceived, Mr. Speaker, as it really was. It was perceived, Mr. Speaker, as it truly was. It was a scheme to influence votes. And Mr. Speaker, not a single job was created by that scheme. When the money ran out, the jobs ran out. Not a single person has been kept on.
There's one sitting right over there right now. So you tell her the man, she knows it.
And so, Mr. Speaker, that was the difference between members opposite and us. In Eleuthera, from North Eleuthera to South Eleuthera, this administration is pursuing business opportunities, projects which will lead to real employment. Employment in the construction of hotel facilities, and employment after the construction of the hotels by jobs in the hotel sector. Mr. Speaker, we are well on the way to manifesting the 10,000 jobs that we promised on the election trail. Because Eleuthera is not the only island that is benefiting from the policies of this administration in seeking to grow the economy and through growth to provide increased employment. Go and ask the people who live in Bimini. Look at what we are doing presently in moving forward the hotel plant at our Lucaya in Freeport. The evidence is clear. Throughout this chain of items, we are growing the economy while at the same time pursuing fiscally prudent policies to ensure that the economic environment that promotes the thriving of business continues to exist in the Bahamas. That is how we are securing our present, and that is how we are securing our future. Mr. Speaker, we have seen, Mr. Speaker, in the last year, a mixed economic environment. In the United States, generally speaking, growth has been steady but slow. And when we came to office, even that growth was in question because of the political climate at the time. The U.S. was going into a presidential election. There were dangers that the Congress would attempt to affect the result of that election through denying revenues. And the political nomenclature, even of the time, changed in that we now heard people talking about the fiscal cliff. And while it seems that the Obama administration has weathered that storm fairly well, with growth and projected growth in their economy, their counterparts in Europe have been less fortunate. We see much of Western Europe in economic turmoil. And these are places that we cannot ignore because our financial services sector depends in some measure on the performances of countries in North America and Europe, from which much of its revenue in the private sector is generated. And so we have had to be careful, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the politically charged environment of recession-prone countries does not adversely affect our economic performance. In February of this year, I think The Economist spoke of $40 trillion being outstanding in tax revenue in the Western Hemisphere. And President Hollande of France even pledged to destroy and obliterate tax havens as entities. And so, Mr. Speaker, earlier when I said that the enormity of what we are about, our responsibility, that enormity really is evidenced by the charged language of politicians in countries which are seeking essentially to claw back as much of their tax revenue as they possibly can. And so, to the extent that my ministry interfaces with the Ministry of Financial Services, I am happy to report that I have had an exemplary relationship with the member for Elizabeth, as we have cooperated to ensure that the Bahamas is seen as a place which is open for business. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, when I attended the first conference I'd been to on behalf of the government, it was at the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force meeting in Miami. And I was told that we hardly ever come to these meetings, that it was thought that we were disinterested in the regional cooperative effort in the financial services protective measures which this forum was created to achieve. They were so happy to see us.
When you close the ministry, that's the sign.
They were so happy to see us, Mr. Speaker, that the Honorable Attorney General was nominated and elected to become the deputy chair of the CFATF last year, with a view to her becoming chairman during this fiscal year. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, we will be hosting a plenary later this year, and such is our commitment to islands other than New Providence that we have chosen to entertain our foreign colleagues in Freeport, Grand Bahama. And so, Mr. Speaker, we hope
You're supposed to say thank God for the PLC. You might as well say it.
through our deliberate efforts to promote Grand Bahama as a convention destination and to bring jobs to its beleaguered, struggling economy. Mr. Speaker, it has also been my pleasure to work with the member for Elizabeth in the modernization of the intellectual property law regime. And I don't think that I don't think that he would begrudge me the opportunity to speak on this topic, because it falls within my portfolio, even though we work lockstep together.
Well, you're right, Baradon.
But, Mr. Speaker, the intellectual property law regime has been under review for over a decade. When we came to office, Mr. Speaker, it was sad to see that something as important to trade, to business, to culture, to the advancement of the Bahamas and the diversification of our economy would have been so ignored by members opposite. Together, Elizabeth and I have ensured that in one short year, the entirety of the legislative regime is ready to be brought to Parliament, and at the earliest opportunity, when Cabinet has determined the date for it, it will be brought to this House for debate and passage. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, this is the focus which the Right Honourable Member for Centreville intended to occur at what had become the beleaguered department of the Registrar General. We have, in one short year, transformed that department, and we are in the process of pursuing a complete modernization of the way in which business at that department and elsewhere within our responsibility is conducted. We will have business conducted online. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, this is a course which had been started between 2002 and 2007, but abandoned by members opposite during their sojourn in office between 2007 and 2012. Abaco now is able to access the Registrar General's Department for certified copies of death certificates, birth certificates, and marriage certificates. And I have had the distinct pleasure of relaunching the program in Harbor Island, Spanish Wells, Lower Bogue, Governor's Harbor, and Rock Sound.
Well done.
I can tell the public that we will be going to Cat Island, San Salvador, Exuma, Andros, and I won't even forget my friend from Macau. It is our intention, Mr. Speaker, to make government accessible to the entire archipelago of the Bahamas. And persons will be able to go online wherever they are in the Bahamas and access government services provided by the Registrar General's Department. It is our intention, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we are able to collect revenues from the services we render online. That is another way in which we improve the fee-earning capacity of the government of the Bahamas. No thanks to you all. absolutely no thanks to you all. The facility had to be restarted in Eleuthera. You did not set it up. In Governor's Harbor, one of my supporters had to even bring a computer to the administrator's office in order to ensure that the speed with which we wish to have this implemented could be achieved. Mr. Speaker, we fully intend to introduce levels of efficiency through the utilization of technology at speed, and we have the full cooperation of the staff who are enthusiastically implementing government policy. Mr. Speaker, much has been said about this government's commitment to the fight against crime. Not only is this government providing resources to the Royal Bahamas Police Force so that it may triple its size, already I know that the Commissioner has formed a brigade which is comprised of persons born in Eleuthera. I have persuaded the powers that be in the police force that it may well be cheaper if our policemen don't have to pay rent that is provided by the government. And that would be more readily achieved if they utilize the local talent that is there. I am happy to say that already persons have been called to come and take the examinations, and the opportunity for Eleutherans to become police officers is a present reality. Mr. Speaker, before I speak about the mini hospital that will be built in Palmetto Point, I have the sad news. I have the sadness, Mr. Speaker, to speak about the deaths of the late Mr. Harold Gibson of Wims's Bight, who lived to be 96, and a dear friend, Frida Main, who died in Nassau, having had to be airlifted here for medical reasons. To the Johnson clan and James Siston, and the Gibson family in Wims's Bight, you have my sincere condolences, and you have the condolences of our community. I have regarded Frida's sons as second brothers, and they have been very, very close to me in much of the political work which I have done in Eleuthera over the last 16 to 17 years. And it is a profound feeling of sorrow that I experienced, because I believe that had the hospital been in existence, she probably would be alive today. And too many people on the island of Eleuthera who can ill afford to be airlifted are passing away because we simply do not have on island resources that are adequate for their needs. It is my first responsibility to ensure that this hospital is built during this term and that we start the process of so improving the quality of life of Eleutherians that those of us who have moved to New Providence will seriously think about returning home and lending our support to the development of a sleeping giant which once was the champion of tourism in this Commonwealth. Mr. Speaker, it is our intention that by the end of this 5-year cycle, Eleuthera will have all of the modern amenities that will enable Eleutherans to be confident in the knowledge that when they go off to school, they can return home and that jobs will be available for them to fill, and that they can play a more meaningful part in the development not only of their island, but of our Commonwealth.
Members.
And, Mr. Speaker, I commend the government for its focused attention to agriculture. In this budget, the establishment of the Agriculture and Marine Science Facility in North Andros will have a rippling effect throughout our country. For we are putting our money where our mouths are. We are putting on the ground a facility which will entrench for our benefit the availability of technology and science for the utilization nationally of persons involved in farming and other forms of agriculture. This is nothing short of groundbreaking, Mr. Speaker. The benefits in the short term of a 15% reduction in our food bill is enormous, because that is upwards of $150 million added to GDP. But when that effect is catapulted across to Eleuthera, Abaco, Grand Bahama, Cat Island, Exuma, and Macau, within 10 years, it is likely that we will have achieved the establishment of a fourth pillar to our economy. For we will not only have agriculture as a pillar, but fisheries. Mr. Speaker, this is part of our government's deliberate plan to grow our economy, and we have put in place the measures that the public can see that we are serious about doing what we are doing. Mr. Speaker, the member for Fox Hill spoke eloquently some months ago on a new policy for immigration. It is important to the economic objectives of this administration that we ensure that we maximize the employment benefits for Bahamians created by the many projects which are being funded in the private sector and by the government. I have spoken just this weekend with contractors in my constituency about the need for them to be properly organized to ensure that they get their fair share of the economic pie that is being created by this administration. There are too many young men in our community, and it's not just in Central and South Luther, who have become accustomed to being spectators while truckloads of undocumented persons are taken to job sites, construction job sites around our country. The time has come for us as a people to get serious about ensuring that we maximize the opportunities which exist in our community. And that means, Mr. Speaker, sadly, that we are going to have to enforce the immigration laws which outlaw the employment of persons who have not been granted work permits under the aegis of the Immigration Act. It is an offense for an employer to employ someone who has not been licensed or permitted by a work permit to work for him in the particular area set out in the license that is provided for. The time has come for the Immigration Department to become more involved and more engaged in ensuring that employers who are in breach of the law are brought before the courts in much the same way as any other person who falls foul of our laws. And we in the government cannot be afraid to enforce the laws of the Bahamas when we see those laws being breached. I spoke to the contractors to ensure that they understood that my efforts to have young Lutherans employed on job sites in the construction industry is a priority for me, and it is a priority which would enable them to get more work, because oftentimes they are cut out of work because of the very selfishness which undergirds the hiring of illegal immigrants who are oftentimes paid a fraction of what would otherwise be paid for similar labor. I believe that coming forward, there will be far more reports from private persons of people who are in breach of the immigration laws, particularly in the construction sector. And I make no apology for taking this position, which I believe to be consistent with what the member for Fox Hill said some months ago. If we believe in Bahamians, we must ensure that Bahamians are treated fairly and given the opportunities to work in their communities. Mr. Speaker, while I am not charged with the responsibility for the office of the Attorney General, it is my responsibility here to report in this space on developments in the Office of the Attorney General and of matters which affect the enforcement of the criminal law and our laws generally, insofar as it involves our office. On coming to office 1 year ago, we embarked on a rejuvenated, reinvigorated swift justice program. We caused regular weekly meetings to be held with the various partners in law enforcement. Not only persons who comprise the criminal section of the Office of the Attorney General, but members of the police force have been in attendance at these meetings. Members of the hospital authority have been there. And the object of our weekly meetings has been to ensure that criminal prosecutions are embarked upon after a fully prepared investigation and a fully vetted process, so that we enhance the chances of succeeding in the criminal justice system. We have, to some extent, been successful in that voluntary bills of indictments have been issued in a far more efficient manner, and dates for trial have been secured in respect of these voluntary bills of indictment. Unfortunately, we are in the year 2016 on dates that have been set, but the good news is that dates have in fact been set, and that the files relating to these matters that have been set down are fully prepared, and if developments occur enabling trials to be brought forward, those matters can be prosecuted before the courts at a moment's notice, subject, of course, to the availability of counsel for the defense and defendants or accused persons. We have slightly improved our conviction rate as a consequence of improving the way in which we have managed the criminal section of the Office of the Attorney General. What has been lacking hitherto, Mr. Speaker, has been a focused attempt by our ministry to gather data, raw statistics, that might be utilized in informing policy decisions. And we have started that process during the course of this year. It's important, Mr. Speaker, because it helps to focus one's attention to the fact that no one department of government stands on its own. In the war against crime, our office interfaces with the Ministry for National Security, and more specifically with the Royal Bahamas Police Force. Both of our ministries interface with the Magistrates Court, the Supreme Court, and the Court of Appeal. Unless we can create synergies in the administration of justice, and more specifically the criminal justice system, improvements in the way in which the administration of the police force and the Office of the Attorney General functions are produced will not be as fruitful as they ought to be. In the court system, we have seen that there are problems in obtaining jury panels, and that has hindered the speed with which trials are able to be conducted. It has actually hindered the court calendar, and something must be done to ensure that the court has the resources of the jury pool in a more efficient manner. We also, Mr. Speaker, have to assist the judiciary in the notion of judicial accountability. And this is a very difficult area to traverse because the question of the separation of powers doctrine arises. It is important, Mr. Speaker, though, that judges appreciate that we are all public officers and that ultimately we are all accountable to the public. And therefore, even in the protected, sanctified halls of the judiciary, there must be an appreciation that public service and public servants may be criticized by the public for inefficiencies. And it is our function as public servants, holding public offices, to so conduct ourselves that we improve the performance of our public offices and introduce efficiencies where such efficiencies do not exist, and in particular where inefficiencies that have been identified to us have become evident. We have looked at records which show that over the last 12 months, we tried 89 criminal trials. In a 52-week year, with 5 criminal courts going, that is simply unacceptable. We ought to be trying far more criminal trials in the Supreme Court than that. And while this inefficient result is not an attempt to blame any member of the judiciary, it points to the need for us to focus on improving systems within the judiciary that assist the judiciary in producing more fair trials each year. And this is a very, very important matter. I note with some happiness that acting Justice Monroe, when he acted, in the 4 weeks of his stint, heard 4 trials and disposed of 8 matters. Sorry? I said with some happiness. However, his success is not consistently replicated throughout the rest of the criminal bench. In one instance, and I'm not going to call any names, for obvious reasons. Sitting for an entire year, only 10 trials were completed. If we are to fight crime effectively, we are going to have to make a concerted effort, all of us together, to ensure that we achieve closer to 200 or 250 trials per year, and we are well away from that. I am happy to announce that we will be appointing 2 judges who will be hopefully acting on the criminal side of the court. But because of the difficulties that we are faced with in the way in which we conduct jury trials, I am not sure that the addition of judges will create the result that we are trying to achieve. Ultimately, judges will have to churn out far more work than what is now being produced. And I say that generically, and I say that without any attempt to interfere in any particular case or in all cases. Simply put, last year we had over 100 murders. The year before that, we had over 100 murders. The year before that, we had close to 100 murders. These matters are being set down, and they're going into 2016. In order to meet the backlog, in order to meet what is happening today, we just have to work harder in every single department at being more efficient with time and more efficient with the resources that we have. That is just a fact of life. Mr. Speaker, much has been said before the Commission dealing with constitutional change about abolishing the right to jury trial. That may well be a way of dealing with this matter, but in light of the results in referenda that have occurred in the Bahamas, it would not be wise or healthy to rely on a plebiscite as a means for achieving that end. And I say that to say this. Most referenda start with the conservative position of the public that change is not what we are for. And in the experience in Commonwealth countries has been that questions that have been put to referenda are often rejected. So that if we are hanging our basket on the abolition of the jury system, that is at present something that we safely ought not to do. And so what we must do is to prepare our system for jury trials in an altered legislative environment. It may well be, for instance, that the way we go about canvassing electors in the parliamentary elections registrars work has to change. Right now, when one registers to vote, no information is taken as to your place of employment or as to whether you have an internet email address. These are things that we could do and which are done in other jurisdictions and which assist not in the electoral process but in the empaneling of juries, because universally in this Commonwealth, in the Commonwealth countries of which we are part, the jury system is manned by persons who are on the electoral roll. And what we ought to do, Mr. Speaker, is to have a system where the information which is collected relative to those persons enables the court system to more readily contact persons to inform them that they are on jury panels. Mr. Speaker, I say this because in one instance, we have had only 8 jurors turn up for court, and all the others had not been served. So this is a real living problem which affects the way in which the criminal justice system operates. It is something that we just simply have to address. What has happened in recent times is that there are numerous persons who have become professional jurors. They sit from session to session, and I applaud those persons who are so public-spirited that they make themselves available when asked. But there's a danger in this, Mr. Speaker, and it is a real danger. If criminals are aware of the fact that there are persons who are professional jurors, those persons may be contacted and they may be contacted at any time. Not so much when they are sitting on a matter that the criminal is involved with, but bear in mind that these persons know that from time to time they get arrested and they may have to go to court. It ought to be clear that the situation that we have is a dangerous situation and that something ought to be done to ensure quickly that we so change the Jury Act as to properly enable the courts to have access to the 100,000 or more electors in New Providence and Grand Bahama who presently are not efficiently being gathered for jury service. And that is a major concern which causes a lot of delays in the court system. Mr. Speaker, it is important that the public be engaged in cooperating in the war against crime. Too many of our citizens are evading jury service. I want to repeat that. Too many of our citizens are evading jury service. We are all in this boat together. The Office of the Attorney General cannot function properly without the cooperation of the public. The police cannot function properly without the cooperation of the public. Likewise, the courts cannot function properly without the support of the public. It is imperative that all of us who exercise the rights of citizens to vote in elections also perform the duties of citizens by rendering jury service when called upon to do so. To that end, Mr. Speaker, it is hoped that if a jury list is published in the papers, persons who read the paper should turn up for jury duty. If you hear your name announced on a community announcement service as being called up for jury service, you should turn up. And we must actually call on people to do their duty as citizens. Look, the problem is this. If we don't do that, the government may well end up in a very expensive exercise of bringing in electors from family islands to serve as jurors. Such a spike in the expense associated with criminal justice would not be reasonable. So I call on the public to assist the courts by turning up for jury service. Mr. Speaker, I am happy to say, Mr. Speaker, that even with the difficulties which I have candidly outlined with the public, crime is generally trending downward in the right direction. Our crime rate is still too high. We are doing our best to reduce it. We can do better, and where we can do better, we will do better. Our response to crime is ever evolving. Our responses in the Attorney General's office to difficulties faced by that office in the performance of its duties are ever evolving. We are confident that we will make the right adjustments and that those adjustments will achieve improvements in the way that we conduct the business of the Office of the Attorney General and the way in which our criminal justice system strives towards providing a fair trial within a reasonable time. Mr. Speaker, on the civil side of the court, we have had some challenges. There are too many cases in which judgments have not been delivered within a reasonable time. There are far too many judgments which have not been delivered within a period of 2 years. Bearing in mind that the Privy Council has held that 3 months ought to be the norm. And indeed, the President of the Caribbean Court of Justice has recently, in an interview with Cajo, suggested that 6 months might even be a reasonable period. Well, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, we have over 50 cases which are well older than the 6-month period, and judgments have not been rendered. Mr. Speaker, this is an important issue because the protections afforded to judges in our Constitution make it very difficult for a judge to be dismissed. In England, it is far easier for the head of judiciary to deal with persons who, for one reason or another, have disappointed in the way in which they have delivered their rulings. And while it is unfortunate that we must comment on this matter, simply put, the delays in the rendering of judgments pose problems in the commercial environment in which business people do business. We are attempting to make the Bahamas the most business-friendly country in the world. We have slipped in the ratings on the ease of doing business globally year in and year out during the last 5 years. It is hoped that everyone in our community, whether they be judge, whether they be member of the public, whether they be members of this place or that other place, whether they be members of cabinet or not, we ought to embrace the view that we want the Bahamas to be number one in all rankings which are positive. And we want the Bahamas to be ranked number one on the ease of doing business, because that means that we will attract business, and in attracting business we will attract jobs, and we will be able to generate the level of government revenues that enables the government of the Bahamas to provide the amenities that our public has come to expect. Everyone, all of us, are called to that public duty of making the Bahamas number one. This government, in this budget, has sought to secure our future by securing the possibility of us achieving the lofty goals which we have set for this country. I commend Minister Halkitis, the member for Golden Isles, and Minister Roll, the member for Pinewood, for having contributed in no small measure to the improvements in the fortunes of our country nationally and of my constituency and the island of Eleuthera. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, it would be sinful for me not to thank the member for Golden Isles, specifically on behalf of the people of Spanish Wells, because their member of parliament neglected to say thank you for bringing down the excise taxes by 6% on fuel used in the private sector to generate electricity, because the people of Spanish Wells will have lower light bills after this budget.
Yes, thank you to the people.
You know, Mr. Speaker, I was startled when my colleague from North Eleuthera criticized this government for not providing money for, I think it was airport development. Mr. Speaker, the strange thing about it, in 1992, Mr. Speaker, Hurricane Andrew took the air traffic controller tower out in Governor's Harbor and left it as a skeleton which had become an eyesore and remained an eyesore until this year, when some friends of mine removed it at no expense to the government. And Mr. Speaker, hardly any money was spent by members opposite during 1992 to 2002 on airport development in either North Eleuthera or Central Eleuthera. We have been simply forgotten. And in one election, the former member for North Abaco had the temerity to tell the people of Governor's Harbor that Eleuthera had had its time, that there was nothing for Eleuthera. The former member for North Abaco. And he meant it, Mr. Speaker. See, it's not just that he said it. He meant it. And the airports are evidence of the sincerity with which he uttered that insult to all of Eleuthera. Mr. Speaker, we have for many, many years simply gotten the crumbs that happen to fall from the table. In fact, in the last 5 years, the former Minister of Tourism's brother-in-law was given a contract to repair the three-island dock. See, they talk about friends, families, and lovers, but it's the fact. And he ran out of money. Left us.
Member stands on a point of order. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Central Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, the member for Central and South Eleuthera is misleading this House. The contract for the Tree Island Dock was awarded to Knowles Construction based on a public tender bid. That project was funded by the Caribbean Development Bank, and there was a public tender for that project where several Bahamian contractors applied. The process was quite transparent. So the fact that this young man was related to the former Minister of Tourism by marriage had nothing to do with his receiving that contract.
Very well. Thank you, honourable member.
Mr. Speaker.
Member for Central and South Eleuthera.
Mr. Speaker, what I said is entirely truthful. I said he was his in-law. He is confirmed by the member for Central Grand Bahama. I did not say anything else.
Very well. The member rises again on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, the
member for Central Grand Bahama
is playing with words.
Absolutely.
The fact that Knowles Construction received the contract had nothing whatsoever to do with his relationship with a former Minister of Tourism. As I stated earlier, sir, it was a very transparent process. As a matter of fact, it was publicly tendered, and it was funded by the Caribbean Development Bank, who oversaw the tender process.
Very well. Thank you, honourable member. Member for Central and South Eleuthera.
I did not say whether the process was open, closed, or anything.
Very well. Your point is made.
I made a statement of fact, and if they drew an inference from that, then that was a matter for them.
Very well.
No, but see, Mr. Speaker, the difficulty I have with members opposite is when it's their turn to dish out matters, they do so. But what he got up and said, the member for Central Grand Bahama, was consistent with what I said. And the fact of the matter is, that was not the only contract that Knowles Construction got. No. I'm saying is that I have said what I have said.
You better go to listen.
And what I have said is accurate. Thanks. Mr. Speaker, the development of Three Island Dock is salutary. It's a salutary project. I'm not criticizing the fact that it was done. It was really done, Mr. Speaker, as a goodbye present to the former member for North Eleuthera. Well, I say a goodbye present because, Mr. Speaker, for the entirety of his term in office, very, very little was done in either North or Central. Which big list? Which roads? We do roads all the time.
Member advised you to continue to address the chair.
Mr. Speaker, we will during the course of this year repair roads, fix roads, and provide new roads in certain circumstances. That is a function of government which I would hardly seek to emphasize as deserving of some special commendation. That simply is a function of government. The provision of docking facilities on an island known, indeed famous, for fishing is far, far more important to the local communities in Eleuthera. But hardly any docking facilities have been restored since 1992 by members opposite when they had an opportunity to do so. But for Jeans Bay. And look at where it listed it. Hatchet Bay's dock is not fair. No. But for Jeans Bay. And even in Jeans Bay, the replacement is less than what had previously existed.
Government knows everybody.
And in any event, as I have said, Mr. Speaker, it's in North Eleuthera. When you look at the docking facilities in the south, there's absolutely nothing to point to. Is it that members opposite took the view that because Central and South Eleuthera had not voted for the F&M, that they were somehow disentitled to government attention in areas of concern to those communities? And that really is the difference, Mr. Speaker, between members opposite and we on this side. We have not ignored those who voted against us. In the fullness of time, it will be shown that we haven't. Indeed, we are not going to cancel, stop, and review the three-island dock rejuvenation. That's not our style. It was theirs, it is not ours. So, Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank the Minister of Education for providing the services of BTVI to Eleuthera over the last 6 months or so. I wish to say publicly, particularly to young men in my constituency and in the constituency of North Eleuthera, that I have been informed that while young women have availed themselves of the services of BTVI in very large numbers, the subscription level from young men has much to be desired. It is hoped that the educational facilities which are provided to our constituency receive the full attention of young men so that we as a community are able to fully utilize your skills and services in the private sector and in the public sector projects which are about to take place. We are hoping to achieve, I was just wondering, we are hopeful of achieving a rebound in the economy of the entire island of Eleuthera, and more specifically in the recession-gripped South Eleuthera. And to fully achieve these goals, we need young men to fully participate in the educational opportunities which have been available and which are going to be available in the constituency and on the wider island. I hope that those who have ignored BTVI and are within the hearing of my speech will go and sign up and take part in the courses, particularly as they relate to trades. Mr. Speaker, I close by thanking the government for its generous allotment of resources to Family Island development. I am painfully aware of the difficulties which were faced in the past 12 months, but I am heartened that the Ministry of Finance, under the leadership of the namesake of the Archangel Michael, has been able to save upwards of $160 million.
Member for Golden Isles.
Through Member for Golden Isles, yes. They've been able to save, Mr. Speaker, $167 million. I think that that is deserving of special mention. And, Mr. Speaker, they have done so through management. Let me stress that. They have done so through management. And that is what had been painfully lacking in the past. Mr. Speaker, they told each department, each ministry, try to conserve what you have, identify the personnel who are on the payroll, ensure that they are actually there, report where employee posts exist but which have not been filled, ensure that we are able to have the information with which to operate managerial policies that will lead to a more efficient running of the government. And that they did. They have even been criticized for doing so by members opposite and some misguided members of the public. But the benefit which has resulted from their prudence is now clear for even the blind to see. And I wish to go on record as saying a special thank you to them, because I think that they have done a marvelous job in the management of our affairs over the last 12 months. Mr. Speaker, In closing, I also wish to say that I have sought this year to assist the member for Marathon in his office as Minister of Education by allocating $40,000 of the $50,000 available to me in the constituency allowance for the purchase and furnishing, the purchase of books to furnish a library facility which will be available to the schools from Governor's Harbor to Deep Creek. It is my hope that in demonstrating our commitment to education and training by this donation, that young people will be inspired to improve themselves and to fully participate in a literate community, and by extension be encouraged to perform in schools at optimal levels so that we are able as a community to show far more for the extensive resources which are made available in the educational system. Next year, I will make a similar investment in another area, but I invite other members of the public to join me in the furnishing of a school library system which, with the cooperation of my colleague to the north, if he is so minded, can be extended to the Spanish Wells. And when I say so minded, I mean with a similar commitment in terms of money, not from his own personal coffers, but from the coffers available to him in his office as as Member of Parliament for North Eleuthera. No, that was a slip. Not Freudian.
Just a slip.
Just a slip. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your indulgence. I am 5 minutes short of 2 hours. And I close ultimately with my reiteration of the support of Central and South Eleuthera for this budget, for the 44 legislative measures attendant to the budget, and my support for the resolution to borrow $450 million as put forward by the Member of Parliament for Golden Isles. I so support.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Kalani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I did not want to...
You're rising on a point of order.
Yes.
Point of order. Point of order. Chair recognizes the member for Kalani.
I did not want to interrupt the member, but the member is totally wrong when he said that the 52-week job program provided no jobs. He knows he's wrong. There are many jobs that were provided, individuals who stayed in the private sector. And I can say confidently that in Kalani itself, 60% of those individuals who came through the 52-week job program subsequently were hired in the private sector, especially in the financial sector. And Mr. Speaker, while the member is throwing aspersions about Current Island, maybe the member would explain about the Eleuthera contract and Knowles. Maybe the member would explain whether it is true the clinic in Palmetto Point, which was reserved to go outside of Palmetto Point, between Palmetto Point and Governor's Harbor on 20 acres of Crown government land, is it now being placed in Palmetto Point, and whose property, how much did you pay, and who was the government former minister?
The Chair, The minister, just a sec, the minister may respond if he so wishes.
On the point of order, unless you deem it a point of order.
The member made an intervention on a point of order.
He made an intervention. Unless you rule that it is a point that I need to...
You are not obliged to answer the member.
Thank you.
They're just offering you to respond. The chair recognizes honourable member for North Grand Bahama. North Eleuthero.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of clarification, I'm very happy to hear the member for South and Central Eleuthero indicate that he's helping with his constituency funds with libraries in this budget. I wanted to just clarify that it's nothing new for me. I've been doing that for many years. I've helped establish the library in Current, the library in Jamesiston, the library in Gregorytown, and we're currently working to reestablish the library that was burnt down at the North Eleuthero High School, as well as the library in Upper Bogue. So this is something we've been doing in North Eleuthero, and I have personally been involved in it for many years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. And thank you for that clarification. As many, the chair recognized the honourable member for North and Central Eleuthero.
I was saying to him, I was inviting him to North Eleuthero.
North Eleuthero.
I wasn't casting aspersions on him. I know him personally, and I know his commitment to education.
And a lot of that work is with PLT.
The system which I am attempting to put in place is a library system which would be accessible
He was a good young liberal.
throughout the entire island. It would mean that instead of us duplicating effort, we would combine our resources, and the library system would be that much larger, and access to the books would be that more efficient. And that was the only point that I was seeking to make. So I am sorry if he felt that I was somehow trying to get one up on him. I wouldn't I wouldn't try that at all.
Very well. Thank you, honourable members, and thank all members for your intervention. As many. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Central Mangrove Key and South Andros.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member yields. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Bain and Grandstand.
Mr. Speaker, I think this would be an appropriate time for the House to suspend. So I move the suspension to 3 p.m. on 10th of June, 2013.
It's been moved and seconded that the business of this House suspends until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many in favour will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The business of this House suspends until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
All right. Yeah.
Second day of debate here on the 2013-2014 budget. We heard from the Member of Parliament for Seabreeze, the Minister of State in Transport and Aviation, Hope Strachan, and we just heard from the Minister of State in the Attorney General's office for Legal Affairs, Damien Gomez, the member for Central and South Eleuthero. When we return at 3 o'clock, the member for South Andros and Mangrove Key, Ambassador Picewell Forbes, will be presenting. And we expect that we will go until 10 tonight as we get more members presenting on this budget, the debate for another 3 days at least. And so on behalf of all of us here at the Parliamentary Channel, we'll see you right back here at 3 o'clock this afternoon.